Okay, it's running. Thank you.
We want to confirm that and this is how you do it in Cypress. So spying on a method in JavaScript is really simple. You can implement yourself. For example, if you want to spy on an object and you're giving a method name, all you have to do, you have to find that method, like the real function, and then override it, like replace it with your own function where you keep like track of how many calls, you can keep track of arguments. And then all you do is call the actual function, because you still want to call person greet. You don't want to stub it. But you just take all your arguments and you pass it to the real function. So that's how you implement a spy. If you want to stub it, if you don't want to just observe a function, but instead don't call it, just call your own thing or just return a value, well, you have to provide the value as argument. And then you say, called and return the value. So you don't call the original thing. So under the hood, spies and stubs are very, very simple to implement. Now, there are a couple of tricky points. First of all, you need to get that object reference, right? In order for you to make a spy, you need to know the person. You have to have that object inside the test. And that's a tricky thing sometimes, right? So what you can do inside your application code is to say, hey, if I'm running inside window.cypress, if that object exists, that means my code is running inside the Cypress test. So I can set window.person to this object so that later in a test, I can go through the window object and I can get to that reference. Okay, but even exposing that person reference, right? You're kind of exposing your application internal code. It's implementation detail, right? If you change and you say instead of person, you say a human or entity, if you rename it, if you refactor your code, all of a sudden your test will stop working because that reference is no longer there. You're testing implementation. You don't want to do that. Much better for you is to use something outside of your code, something common like console object. So a console object is provided by the browser. So if you spy on a console log method, well, you're spying on something that's browser API at a boundary. It's not internal code, right? But you can still do the same thing. You can say, hey, console log should have been called once with hello. All right. So the big idea is avoid stubbing and spying on internal implementation details, and instead spy and stub what happens at the periphery of a browser, where your application has to communicate with outside world, in this case through console. But in Cypress, the most common thing is to find DOM elements, so which is another browser periphery, which is standard, will never change. So as long as your application is outputting elements in a DOM and your test finds them and asserts them, you're good. You're not testing implementation details. And the network is also something at the periphery of your application, right? It's something that's a standard. So because Cypress tests run in the browser, you can stop pretty much anything in the browser. You can, for example, stop navigator methods. Like you can test how your application shows the battery. If it's charging, what's the charging? You can just stop it, and your web app can just do it. You can stop things like window.open. Window is a common object. Open is a standard method. So if somewhere inside your application code you call window open, well, it usually opens a second tab, right? And Cypress cannot do that. So what can you do? You can say, give me the window object. So we need the window object reference. And then we'll stop that method open so it no longer gets called. And then we'll click and confirm that it works, right? So this is how we prevent the second tab from opening. We can even go beyond that. Cypress spies and stubs are implemented on top of Synon.js library. It's the most powerful stubbing and spying library out there. People rave about JS mocks and stubs like they are like kids play. Synon.js is the real thing. So for example, you can stub window.open, call your own function with calls fake, confirm wherever you want to confirm, like the target, and then call the method you stub, like it's called wrap method, and then change the target. And instead of opening a second tab, open it in a self. And this is how you can confirm that your application is trying to open a next tab, but you can actually point at yourself and continue the test there. And this is how it works, where what would normally be opening a second tab and stopping Cypress test now just works all inside the same tab, and the test continues. But another big thing that's bad about spies and tabs is that you have to make sure you do it at the right time. So you have to make sure you set up a spy before it happens, before that method greet actually is called. Then the application somehow calls it, and then you confirm it. So the last thing is easy, because Cypress retries it. It will just watch that spy, and as soon as the application calls it, then it will continue. So, but you have to make sure that 1 happens before 2, that you create a spy or stub before it gets used. Great. So what happens if in our application, well, we set up a stub, right? We click on a button and we confirm the behavior. That's our window open. What happens if application immediately calls window open, right? Not in response to the click, but immediately on load? Well, if you visit the page and then try to create the stub, right? It's too late, right? You created the stub after the fact that the action already happened. You're late. So you can try, for example, saying cy window and create the stub before you call cy visit, but the problem is there is no window object yet because you not visited anything, so the window object hasn't been created. So, right? So the solution in Cypress is to, when you visit, use a method called onBeforeLoad, and you'll get a window instance, but it's like clean. It has been created, but the application hasn't started loading yet, so you can do whatever you want. This is a place where you can just stub anything you want. You want to remove service, worker support, remove it. You want to change navigator language, change it. Right? You want to stop a window open, you can do it right now. This happens before application executes. My kind of suggestion, if you're doing cy visit and you use onBeforeLoad, you might as well use cy on window before load event. So this will fire every time a new window is created. If your application goes from page to page to page, you don't want to just stop window open on the first visit, because when it goes to the next page, that window object will be recreated. You want to stop all of them. So you can do it using cy on, right? So no matter how many pages the test visits, all of them will have window open stub. And you can even do more. In Cypress, every event has, you can express it using little cy on or big Cypress.on. So if you use cy.on, notice that we're using cy stub, right, inside the callback. That means we actually need the little cy instance, and the little cy instance only is valid inside a test or a hook, like before each, before, after each, after. Because we're using cy stub, we actually need to run inside a test or a hook. So we're using little cy on. Sometimes we don't care about the actual cy stub, like little cy, because we're not going to call cy commands. Like we're not using cy stub in this case. In this case, we're just saying every time we're loading a window, we want to delete window fetch property, right? We want to kind of pretend that there is no fetch support. In this case, we're not calling any cy stub commands, right? But we don't care. But it can be outside. It's almost like a general event handler. So in this case, we can just place it somewhere in a spec or support file, and for every window load, window fetch will be deleted. Great. So what am I talking about? Why I'm not talking about cy.intercept, right? What is this? So let's talk about Cypress Intercept. I mean, the network in general. So before Cypress Intercept, we had cy server command, and then you had to call cy route. When you called cy server, under the hood, what we did, was we got the window object from the application, and then we have overwritten XML HTTP request object, right? This is the AJAX object that you would use before like window.fetch support. Application code would create an instance of this object to actually make AJAX request. It would call open method and then send. So cy server just overrides XML HTTP request object. Okay, and it replaces everything with spy and stubs inside, like using cy stub, cy spy, and returns it. So when application uses it, we can spy and stub those things. And cy route is just bookkeeping. It's like creating a table of routes that you want to override or spy on. Okay, so this is all it is really under the hood. It all happens inside the browser window. When application is using that overwritten XML HTTP request, we get the spy or stub notification. Right? It all happens right there in code, just like window open happened all in code. Well, with newer applications, they don't use XML HTTP requests. They use the newer window fetch. So we said, hey, you want to use our method of stubbing and spying network. Before every load, just delete window fetch and hope that your application includes a polyfill. But your application knows that if it's running on a browser without window fetch support, it has to drop down to XML HTTP request. Well, many applications did not include polyfills anymore. So we say, okay, we'll include a polyfill for you. Just stop complaining about it. So I've written this support experimental feature. You just set up it in your Cypress.json file, experimental fetch polyfill true, and then we do what I've shown above automatically, but we also inject a polyfill for you so that we implement window.fetch on top of our XML HTTP request override. Okay, unfortunately, when you use cy route in your application, all it really meant was you go to window, you get that window.fetch stub, and you just resolve it with like object, right? Like under the hood, it was just like we stub window.open. It's not a real network call. It was all done in code just to simulate. Your application is using window.fetch, boom, it got a resolve promise with something back. It doesn't behave like a real browser at all. Like the caching mechanism, the cores, like cross-origin security check, doesn't happen because it's not a real network request. It never went to the network layer. It was just done in code immediately. And for example, your application might not be doing requests directly. It might actually ask a web worker or a service worker to make requests or load something. And those requests were completely outside of Cypress, right? And so those requests would not be impossible to stub or even see in Cypress. And finally, we didn't want to just stub AJAX fetch or XML HTTP request. You want to be able to control everything. You want to see when your application, for example, finishes loading an image resource or downloads a binary file or uploads a form, right? Or even does something weird like does content security policy violation call, right? So we really needed something more. For a long time, we had this issue open 687. At some point, we every big issue by number, so you don't even have to remember it. As you can see, this was open a long time ago, and it had hundreds of upvotes, and I'm just kind of putting the positive here, because in reality, you have hundreds of thumbs up, hearts, and you have hundreds of angry comments, like how come it hasn't been done yet? Like, I cannot believe this issue has been open for 3 years. What are you doing? Are you just I don't know, doing drugs or something? Why not working? So I worked on this issue for a while. I did my implementation. Brian didn't like it, so it went nowhere. Then Zach, came in and he did the implementation that Brian liked. So we actually got it working. So the new architecture is different. Remember, cy route, it was just a stub inside the browser. The new thing is different. So when Cypress opens a browser, Electron or Chrome, that browser runs, but the Cypress itself, like the application Cypress, that little thing that starts, acts like a proxy. So all the traffic from that browser is going through Cypress, right? Like, and that was that way forever. That's how it worked from very beginning. So all requests were, proxied. The only thing is that we never actually did anything with those requests. We only injected like document domain, but like to allow Cypress to work, but we never actually could do anything else. We never had code to do anything else. So now we added code to intercept HTTP calls from the application, but do it inside Cypress network proxy, outside the browser. And this means any request. All those requests you see in the network panel, from the app, static resources, AJAX, web worker, service worker, they all have to go through a proxy, right? So we could actually control them all inside the test. So here's what's happening right now. So cy.server and cy.route are deprecated. Well, they'll be removed at some point when we have like full feature parity, when everyone says, oh yeah, I'm not using it, I switched to cy.intercept, thank you so much for doing it. Then we'll remove it. Right now, they just marked as deprecated, but they're not going anywhere anytime soon. By the way, my VS Code without any plugins, just stock, because it has like add deprecated flag in the types, it shows those names with like strike through. Like you don't have to install anything, it should just work. Okay, so the general form of cy.intercept command is to say, hey, here's a route I want you to intercept. And because you just gave the root name or like a pattern or like what we call root matcher, that means you want to spy on it, right? Like you want that request continue, but later you'll be able to wait, inspect it and so on. But if you say, I want to intercept this route, but also you give a response, that means you want to stop it. You don't want to go to the server, you want to stop it and send it back. And in both cases, you'll be able to say as alias and give it an alias that you can later wait on, get, and use during your test. So kind of is the same. So here's a typical form. You can say intercept URL and maybe route handler, method URL, give a handler, and maybe more advanced route matcher and route handler. So if route handler, which is optional, is present, but it's most likely means you stubbing it. Not necessarily, I'll show an example when it's not, but most cases, if you give a response, if you tell us what to do, right, that means you don't want it to go to the server. Here are a couple examples. So if I'm intercepting HTTP example.com/widgets, it's a spy. And by default, we will spy on every HTTP method. So get, post, head, like patch, put, all those methods. There are so many of them. Here's a stub. I want to intercept any request to widgets, and I want to return a picture file that I have in my Cypress/pictures. Or I want to just intercept post to that URL, and I want to send 200 and just text. And this is equivalent to this, right? You can do route matcher as an object, where you can say method, URL, I can have a lot of properties that we will use to actually filter requests and say only do it for this thing. For example, you can intercept on a path. So you don't care about the domain, the host name, but you just want to say if it goes to /search and then the query. So we automatically parse the URL and we grab the query parameters. So if you're searching for Q, which is like a field in URL, some terms will only match those and do something with that. Or you can give, for every property, you can give a regex, a regular expression. So you can give wildcards. It could be pretty advanced, right? The interesting thing now is that now, because all requests can be spied or stubbed, sometimes the same request matches multiple intercepts. So imagine application is just doing like get favorite fruits, right? Just fetching a list of fruits. Well, the first intercept will say match anything using wildcard but has dash fruits, and when we can give it its own alias. And the second intercept can say match anything but starts with favorite and then stub it and return lemons. And then the third one just says, just spy on it. So imagine a single request, it can actually go through match all of them, right? And it goes through them at the order as what they were defined. So this will be first one, right? This will be the second, line 4. And finally, this will be the fifth one. So as you define them, that's how requests will match them. And so it will happen, it will match the first route, so you'll be able to wait for it. Then it will match the second one, you also will be able, but notice the second one is actually a stub. It actually responds with lemons. So the third one will never be matched because it never gets there. Because it goes through the first intercept, the second one stops it and sends it back, and the third one never receives it. So you can confirm that you see lemons, for example. Okay, so this presentation has a bunch of examples following this. I just want to say that we have a lot of docs and examples in the official command URL documentation page, intercept. I also have written a blog post that I kind of show the difference at that moment between route, and we used to call cy.intercept cy.route2, during experimentals phase, but it's the same command. And we have in Cypress example recipes repo a huge cy.intercept recipe that shows like pretty much everything and how it works and how it should work. So there are more like 90 good tests that you can see and learn from. People complain about problems, so I've written a blog post about Cypress Intercept problems. Some of them are legit, some of them we already fixed, and some of them just have easy workarounds. So that's also useful. And finally, we have a repo called Testing Workshop. And there's a section of that repo that talks about network. And we used to have the solutions, the answers, using cy.route, and now added the same solution using cy.intercept. So if you know cy.route, it's easy to kind of understand one by one, like how you should rewrite your test in order for you to use cy.intercept. Okay. This is all has been equivalent to cy.route in my opinion. Yeah, there is like wildcards and more like better route matchers, right? But it's not why we're excited about this, or I'm excited. Cy.intercept has this superpower, or as we call it, Cypress power. Both route handlers and route matchers could be dynamic. You can actually write code to do something depending on a request or response. Okay, so here's how it looks. Biggest problem, cy.route. You're using GraphQL, everything goes through the same endpoint, post/GraphQL. All the requests, all different things, and you could not really do anything about it, right? You could not say, for this query, return this fixture, for this update, return this object, right? You could not, because it was all static. But now, when you're handling this query in your intercept, you can actually write code. You can write this little function, right? You can say, on request, look at the request body and say, well, if it's a mutation, you can assign it an alias. So the alias could be dynamic. So you're only interested in mutations. So your application can fetch a bunch of data, you click a button, it fires off a mutation, and you only wait on that mutation. And then you can confirm that it's as expected. And by the way, so this is an example where we set up a route handler, but it still is a spy. It's not a stub. It still goes to the server because we haven't modified. We just assigned an alias to that. You can say, hey, if you're mutating, just return this. And this is how you actually do this. You say rec object, right? That's the request coming from your application. You can say rec reply. And when Cypress will know that it's a stub, you just want to send it back. And again, this is dynamic, which is great. You can not just stub dynamically or spy. What can happen? You can say request reply and then give a callback. And that callback will get this response object. So this is response from the server. So intercept allows the request to go in all the way to the server response, and now you get it back and you can modify it. You can add assertions, right? You can save it somewhere. So in this case, I'm saying, hey, the server probably sends so much stuff, I don't care, just give me the first 3 items and just forget the rest, so my page looks nice for my test. And then it will get back to my application. So here's how it works in steps. So imagine we have our application, browser window, our proxy, and the World Wide Web. Somewhere there's a server. So the first thing we do, we have to say, I want to intercept this match URL, and I want to call my callback function. So the matcher is sent into the proxy layer. So Cypress can talk to the browser at all times to its code using a WebSocket connection. So it sends the matcher. So then the application is doing a fetch or something else. We hit that and we send back that request using the socket message mechanism that we have behind the scenes. So it gets sent back to the callback. And thus, we call that callback in your browser, like right there. You can use your local variables, everything. It actually executes like how you expect it to execute right there. We don't send the handler to the proxy. We just keep it there. And then we call it when we send the request. And then you can modify send it response. OK. And now everything depends on response. Maybe you stopped it. And so we just send the thing back to the application. If you said rec reply, here's an object. So to application, it looks the same as if it came from a server. Maybe you did not stop it. Maybe you just modified some headers, some data, and you want to send it to the server. So we just continue sending the modified request to your backend server, to your destination. Okay. When the server responds, you want to modify, you want to inspect it. So we send the response back to your callback. We execute it. You can modify, like I modified like the number of items in the response. So we send it back to the proxy, and then it responds to our application. Our application thinks it's talking to the backend directly. It has no idea what has happened. The only problem that people trip over is they look at the request and like, hey, I don't see any modifications. Like my callback in my intercept has done things, but I don't see it. So imagine I have a server and the server just sends back request headers. Like, that's fine. So here's my test. And in my test, I'm saying, I'm interested in this call and I want to add like some custom header. Maybe it's my authorization token. So I'll get that request object. I'll set my custom header, and then it should continue, right? And then I can confirm it. So what happens? The test passes. Everything is as expected. Like you can see the server actually gets that custom new header, and it's present. But they open network dev tools, right? And it's not there. Like that custom header is not present. Well, it's not there because we modify the request after it left the browser, right? Like after it's already left the browser doesn't see it, so it cannot show it. But what you can do still, if you click on the wait, right? Like if I actually inspect the intercept, you can see that we added it. You can confirm it. So in your test, you can make sure that that request has been added. And so the filter works. Okay, a couple examples. I will probably skip a couple, but because of time, but they're all there. The slides are not going anywhere, so you can inspect them at your leisure. Superpowers. Forget about Ajax. Here's my test. I'm intercepting the actual index.html, the first page my test is loading. I'm getting a reply from the server, and then I'm appending more HTML. I'm overwriting the page I'm loading. I'm adding it a footer. Boom. You can rewrite your page. Maybe it has some security mechanism. Rewrite it. I'm receiving CSS. I can add solid pink to my list items. It's a great prank to play on your coworkers. Just like change the CSS a little bit. See if they can understand like why we're going crazy. But important thing. Sometimes if a server knows that the item resource hasn't changed, because this is a static resource, it's cached by your browser. So it sends all these caching headers. And if you don't remove them, well, the server will say hasn't changed. So it will not actually send the body. So you have to do it. You have to remember, you're dealing with real browser. Here's the thing that I like to do. Spy on Ajax requests, wait for them, get the response body, and confirm that everything that the server sent has been showing on the screen. Right? So all the 5 items are there. I'm not stubbing anything, so it goes to the server, but also I'm still confirming that all the items are present. You can inspect all the data inside the intercept if you wait for it. So you can see that it has request, response, everything. If you want to run multiple assertions, you can wait once and then use get and get that request multiple times, right? To check its status code, maybe check the response. Or you can wait and use .then to get that intercept and use multiple assertions inside the .then callback. And it works the same way. So one of the interesting things is like what happens if you want to confirm that the application is not making a network call, right? So this is a tough one, right? So imagine my application, it actually polls the backend every 30 seconds. So it loads, makes AJAX request, and then 30 seconds later gets the new list of items. Well, you can confirm that this happens once, right? You can set a local variable, say polled, and then you can say when you intercept poll true. So on the first request, it will say polled. You can visit your page and then say polled should be true. Wait 5 seconds and then check again and say, oh, okay. So in 5 seconds, no requests have happened. Great. This test is passing. I'm confirming that we're doing a AJAX once, polled is true, but then 5 seconds later, nothing has changed. The application is not doing any request. My advice here is to actually combine network intercept with cy.spy. So check this out. I'm using cy.intercept, but I'm passing a cy.spy. When you say call cy.spy, you create a function, empty function that just does nothing. It just passes its arguments, right? Like it does nothing. Because we're not calling rec reply, Cypress thinks, oh, you haven't modified anything. You just called your bookkeeping. I'll just continue with my network. That means you call the cy.spy and can allow the network to continue. But having a cy.spy is very convenient because you can do things like get the spy alias and say should have been called once. So you're not checking the network, you're just checking how many things your cy.spy has been called. When you wait 5 seconds and you say should have been still called once. Again, the test works the same thing. In pink, you see your cy.spy aliases. But imagine you still want to confirm that the second call happened 30 seconds later. It's kind of difficult, right? Like you don't want your test to wait for 30 seconds using cy.wait. I mean, Ramona would never approve this on her CI. The test is way too slow. So what do? So you can bind cy.intercept and cy.clock. If you never use cy.clock, it stops the clock. Cy.clock should really be called cy.stop clock. So it stops all set intervals, set timeouts, everything. So you say cy.clock, that freezes everything. And when you create your intercept, you visit the page, it fires off, network request, everything is fine. And you confirm that your cy.spy has only been called once. And then you can control the clock yourself. And you do it by saying cy.tick, which means you're advancing this clock, that frozen clock, by 5 seconds. And after 5 seconds, Cypress will fire all set intervals, set timeouts, all the things that application actually was supposed to do in those 5 seconds. Well, in our case, we say, hey, our spy still should have been called once, right? Because our application is not making a request in the first 5. But then we can say, well, advance the clock by 25 seconds more. And now our spy should have been called twice, because after 30 seconds, the application made a second request to the thing. And this is how it looks. And it's super fast. You're not waiting 30 seconds. You're only waiting 200 milliseconds. But you can see that the application is making 2 network calls to the backend. I'm not surprised. cy.clock is like one of these advanced topics where once you write more tests, you hit it. But now you know. That's why you come to this Cyprus, Germany meetup. Really quickly, have you noticed when it loads, there is this tiny circle that appears for split second, like right here? What about all these loading elements? All this loading, they're so fast. How do you actually check that they appear? So you can, when you see that, go back and look. I'm actually pausing at a command using Cypress time traveling debugger. Okay, and when I click on it, it shows the DOM, so I can see it clearly that it's there. So first thing, I have to find the selector. I know I have to find how to find that element. So what I do, I use a built-in thing in cy.intercept called delay. So I'm stubbing the network call, but I'm saying reply with this response after 25 seconds. Okay, so then I open DevTools and I start inspecting things, and I find, oh, this loader just has a class loader. Okay, so kind of quick and dirty, delay my network request or response in this case by 25 seconds, use DevTools, find the loading indicator, and once you found it, delay only by a second. Right? So cy.intercept will delay by a second and then send by apple, banana, cantaloupe. We're visiting the page. We now use getLoader class, should be visible. And then we say should not exist. So after 1 second, it should just go away. And it doesn't load. Okay, just believe me. It passes. It becomes visible and it becomes invisible. The question is, which you might ask yourself, why is it 1 second? Well, obviously, because 2 seconds would be way too long. We don't want to be wasteful. Oh, now it loads. Okay. And less than 1 second is not enough. Okay, so we can speed it up. We can return a promise from our intercept. Check this out. We can say delay, but we're using a promise delay. So if you return a promise from your intercept, Cypress knows to wait for it. So in this case, it does the same thing. Whenever it loads, it actually delays the response by 1 second and then responds. Okay, but it acts the same way. But some smart people, not me, but you see this blog post, they come out with a better way. They say, well, if you're waiting for a promise, just create a promise, expose the resolve method. Inside the intercept, you still wait for that promise to resolve. So you wait for this promise. But what you do is you say, visit the page, get the loader, should be visible. After it's visible, then you call send response, which resolves this promise and request replies. It's kind of smart, right? And that's one of the beauty of cy.intercept syntax is that all these intercepts, they execute in a browser. right? So you can use variables that are shared between the rest of the test. Okay, so this test is extremely fast, right? Because it never does unnecessary waiting. Loads the page as soon as the indicator. I personally don't like this test. I would rather have like a wait of once or delay of 1 second, and I'll tell you why. This test, if you record it on CI and something is broken, when you look at that video, it's way too fast. You actually might miss it as a human yourself, but I don't see a loading indicator. I don't know how it's supposed to look here. I would actually prefer a couple of second delay so that I see a video myself as a human being. I was like, yeah, that's how it's supposed to look while it's loading. Oh, by the way, why is it on the side and not at the center? Like, this is broken, right? So don't try to super optimize. And also, this syntax, I think it's way too complicated, right? Like, don't do that. Use the simple solution. It's usually better long-term for maintenance. Okay. More powers. You can stub redirect. So when the server responds with a redirect, which is status code 302 and the new location, like where the server wants to send you, and if it's a different domain, Cypress cannot do that. You can confirm the redirect, but then, boom, no, I'm going back home. I'm not going where you want me to go, right? Not my problem. And then you can confirm that you are back where you started. So in this case, I started at redirect example, page loaded, everything, and boom, I'm back at the home where I want to be. Okay, problems. What people consider problems, right? This is small p, and the background of this image, if you know the song, more money, more problems, right? It's like way too much money is like way too powerful, right? People want to change the response. Like, that's the biggest thing. Like, I don't want to return the same thing. I want to overwrite my intercept. One time I want to return one thing, second time I want to return something else. Well, how do you do that? Guess what? You have all the code powers you want. So in this case, I want to return different fruits. First, I want to return apple. On the second request, I want to return grapes. And after that, forever, I want to return kiwi. Okay, so you just write code inside your root handler function where you say, if k is 1, right, just reply with apples. When k is 2, grapes. After that, always give them kiwi because kiwi is cool. And when you do our normal kind of clock control, right? So apples, grapes, kiwi, you can kind of see them really quickly changing here. If sometimes, maybe not even, it's too fast for humans, right? Was it difficult? No, I don't think it was difficult. You can even be smart and say, hey, I'll put all my responses in an array, and then every time you ask, I'll just shift, which will return the first item, remove it from array, so like go boom, 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 and then after that, default, when it returns undefined, I'll just return kiwi. I mean, you can be as tricky or smart or abstract as you want. You can write your own programmatic logic to change your responses, right? So I described a bunch of solutions to what people complain about not being able to override stubs and spies inside this blog post. But because people complain, we're still working on like universal thing where you'll be able to say, I want to change this spy or stub and return something else. I want to completely remove it or replace spy with a stub or spy with a stub and so on. So we're still working on it. It's coming. It's just a general solution to this is hard because you can solve an easy case like what I've shown before, like really simple. We have a PR that says like times, whatever. But as soon as you do that, you come up with so many edge cases where you're like, but if I want to do that, like how do you express in your syntax? And it becomes super complex. It's like, you know, a 20% thing should solve 80% of the solution, but we're trying to come up with 100%, and that takes time and so on. So the real problem are this. If you go to Cypress GitHub repo, we have a label for issues called package net stubbing. So all the problems with cy.intercept have this label. So if something's not working, you want to go to that label and kind of see, hey, maybe it's an open problem. For example, right now, spying or stubbing binary files, like, is broken, right? So kind of a big deal, I would say. Sometimes aborted network requests are not cleaned up, and so on. So the real bugs, we're trying to work on them. And I think this is our top priority, not full kind of API for replacing things. Okay, so I want to finish with all the resources that I covered. You know, everything from the API page to all the blog posts to this presentation slide. And also, I have my YouTube channel where sometimes I post short videos, because some of these things are easier to understand when you see me kind of opening DevTools and like pointing out, rather than me writing a blog post and so on. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. I really appreciate a chance and opportunity to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let us, maybe Ramona is quicker, open the mics again. So
yeah, I try to be quick.
okay,
I'll
now you can
start.
unmute yourself and let Gleb hear the applause.
Wonderful.
Yay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're so kind. You're so kind.
Thank you.
All right. Let's take
A lot of
at the
information.
question.
I apologize. Yes, I tried to pack everything, right? And every time I was like, oh, let me show how the like headers modification works, because you don't see it in the network tab. So I'll just put it there. And what will happen, I probably will put more slides if I see more problems. So we already linked it in our cy.intercept page, right? Just so people can find it, because I think this kind of collects the current state of things and explains how it works. Do you have a deadline to migrate from root to intercept, was the question. No, right? We will remove cy.root when everyone who uses it right now will say, yeah, it works. Like, I don't need it anymore. Cy.intercept does everything. Our own real world application, for example, right now hasn't imported. We hit problems. So we cannot even migrate all our apps, our demo apps. If we, whenever we migrate, we'll mark it or we'll do it in a major release of Cypress. So we release Cypress every 2 weeks, and every couple, like let's say 12 weeks, so every 3 months, we make a major bump, right? Where we remove things that obsolete. So the next one is coming probably in 2 weeks, and we'll remove Cypress.moment library that we bundle. And probably, for example, for cy.intercept, we'll change like some of the JavaScript JSON parsing rules, right? We'll just parse more by default. So Cypress root is not going anywhere. When we remove it, will be a major Cypress version bump.
Maybe let me also share the screen, because we have some
sure
questions in the Slido. And how to start best with this? I guess from top down, because this is the most favorite answer.
I think that's the best, yeah.
Yeah, so Andre is asking how would one use Cypress with GraphQL? All requests go to the same endpoint. I think a little bit
so you
showed.
see what I've done, right? You get this request function, but gets request object. By the time you get it, it already parsed the body, right? Like the GraphQL request body has been parsed. So now you can look at the headers. Maybe you have operation name there. You can look at the body to see like what GraphQL thing you're trying to do, and then go from there. If you call request.reply, that means you stub it and you send the things back. If you don't call it, it will continue to the server, right? And then you can just spy on it. So that's how you would do it.
Okay, next question is, My major questions are regarding server connection. I have heard I should stop, but how I wonder if that gives us enough confidence since it's stopped.
Absolutely. So we have a network request guide where we kind of talk about this problem. So I'll put it in a chat. So imagine you start a new web application. There is no backend, right? The backend team is just on vacation. Maybe we went to, I don't know, Amsterdam and they got frozen and it's Corona. So they cannot get back for a month. So what do? In that case, you use cy.intercept and you create a fake backend. You're like, oh, okay, I need list of fruits, boom, intercept for all my requests. And then you're like, oh, I need to update a fruit, so I'll intercept post request. And then you write your test, you have your application, boom. Now the backend team gets back and they're like, okay, we're coding the fruit API, we're using all the latest, we're using, I don't know, some Java server, like Tomcat. And you're like, okay, whatever. And then you're like, let me remove, like comment out all the cy.intercepts. And now you're hitting the real backend, right? A good advice there is to change from stubs to spies, where you like remove all the route handlers, and instead you just confirm that what the server sends and receives is what you expect it to be, right? So that you can really even check your API. A lot of people tell us, hey, even checking the response status code from cy.intercept when you're spying is good, because sometimes our backend, especially in staging or dev environments, is bad. So it responds to like 400, right? And all the things. So we want to make sure that our test, when it fails, is not because our app is wrong, but because we got the bad backend API response. So we do those things just as to confirm. So you are on a step 2, right? Remove all the stubs, just use spies to confirm. And then after a while, you'll notice that your application, some of the backend requests are slow because maybe they're expensive, right? Maybe there is a request to third-party system. And you're like, I don't want my test to wait just because of this third-party system. So you just stop those requests, okay? And maybe you test those API endpoints with just a couple of API tests, just to make sure they still work, okay? So you can start with just stubs, move on to just spies or no spies, or like just full end-to-end. And after a while, you'll see for performance reasons, but you'll have to stub selectively. Okay, this is what I would do.
Sorry, you still
No,
wanted to add?
No, nothing. I just want to answer the question about WebSockets.
I just wanted to note, please stop voting, because then the order is constantly changing, and maybe we skip even your question.
No,
so this is now the next one.
You see that double arrow that appears on hover on the question? You see that? Yeah. So if you click that, it locks it in the top position. Okay. So now you can still vote, but the question like you want me to answer will be there. Unfortunately, we wanted to do WebSockets as part of cy.intercept, but WebSockets is a completely different thing, right? It's not HTTP. So for us, it became like unmanageable nightmare to include that. So right now it kind of was left out, and I'm sorry, I meant to add it as a future work, but right now we're not doing anything on it. My suggestion for WebSockets. So WebSockets have a single kind of usually point of contact. You probably use a library for dealing and opening with WebSocket, and then you say, on this message do this, on this message you do. So what you want to do there, from your Cypress test, get the socket, instance, right, of your class that actually deals with. Get the method that calls like on this message that, on that, and spy or stub it using cy.spy, cy.stub. Okay, so you intercept those messages not at the network layer, but at application layer. Unfortunately, I don't have any examples of it, so just ignore WebSockets completely. That's what I would do.
Okay, thank you. And this one. On which use cases would spying, stubbing be considered a bad practice? Should it be avoided?
I mean, like, if your server works, right? If you can spin the environment during testing, and for example, and it's just your dedicated environment, right? Don't stub anything, because you want to use the real thing all the way through. Another thing, when stubbing is necessary, imagine you are testing staging server, right? The staging server is used not just by your Cypress tests, by other tests as well, right? It's a single environment. So if you, let's say, truncate the table and like remove all the users, well, someone else is using that. So you cannot do it. You have a shared backend. So in that case, you want to stop things because you cannot use the backend because it's shared. Production, right? In production, you probably want to like do some smoke test where they stop when they actually have to delete something, because you don't want to like do things in production that's bad, right? So I would say if you can do the full end-to-end test, like don't stop. Okay, stop when necessary.
Okay, continue. Oh, damn.
So I posted a link in the chat before. So we have our ambassadors thing, and it's how to apply. So in principle, right? What you do is.
Oh, damn. I clicked somewhere wrong. I'm sorry. Give
It's
me a
okay.
second. I'm doing it the first time. Yeah.
I think if you go to admin on Slido, you can like restore some of the questions.
Yeah, I do that.
So I just want to answer about ambassadors. So if you love Cypress, try doing a meetup presentation about it, right? Try writing a couple of blog posts. Maybe do a conference presentation. And if you find it interesting and you want to do more, you know, you can apply to be ambassador. You have to have like public presentations where you're like, here's how like I understand Cypress. This is like how I'm making it more popular. What it will give you is Cypress key short and access to Cypress ambassador Slack channel where I'll answer your questions. Or you can just send me a tweet or email or on our chat channel, ask the same question and I will answer them as well. So like, it's not as cool as being like ambassador to the UK, right? Like it's nothing like that.
Okay, thank you. And I think I managed to restore the other questions.
Okay, how to avoid callback hell when dealing with multiple fixtures in a single spec file. So what the offer of this question means is that when you do cy.fixture, you have to use .then, and then you get the loaded fixture. And so if you have a bunch of them, you'll have cy.fixture, then cy.fixture, then cy.fixture. So you load the 3 files and you already like 3 callbacks deep. Here's what you do. First of all, if you're just loading JSON, you don't have to use a fixture. You can like import fixture directly as a file, and bundler just gives it to you. So like my fruit examples, I don't need a fixture for that. I can just import fruit and then it's like local variable and I can just reply things. Second, in my example, cy.intercept, when you respond and you want to respond with a fixture, you can just say respond like and then fixture name. That's it. Like it will respond, like you don't have to load it. Another thing you could do, you can load fixtures in your before each block and say as and give it an alias name. So fixture like fruit.json as fruit. And later in your test, if you use function syntax, not arrow functions in your it callback, but function callback, then you can just use that fixture using this.alias name. So this.fruits will refer to the object, because when we use load fixtures and you use as alias name, we set that fixture object as that alias on a Mocha text context object. So look at our fixture documentation, it gives examples.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is, How do you set up Cypress to have code coverage to make sure that tests fail below the threshold?
It's a great question. So I will give a very long answer, of course, because code coverage is my passion. So first of all, I'll put the link in our code coverage guide. Right, we've done a lot of work with code coverage. Second of all, we have a plugin. So once you set up Cypress with a code coverage plugin, you'll get a report, a JSON object, all the things saved automatically that give you the code coverage locally. Here's the problem with like test failing. So after you get that report, you can use like NYC tool and say check coverage. I have my own tool that you can use that actually is slightly better. So I posted in a link. So that tool will actually fail if you have below the threshold or certain file is not covered, all the like real things. But here's the big problem. This is fine if you run all the tests on a local machine, right? Because you have full coverage. What happens if you run tests in parallel? Let's say one CI machine runs test and then another one runs test, and you can use like parallelization flag or not, it's up to you. How do you combine code coverage, right? How do you check code coverage against another branch? So these questions are now become more difficult to answer because you're now talking about like data from different machines and code coverage being collected together. This is where you want to use a code coverage as a service, right? So recently we've done a webinar with like CodeCov. We use them ourselves. You can use any coverage service. Both services are nice. You run all your tests and you from each machine just send them code coverage results that like our plugin generates. And those services combine it for you, and then they post status on your GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab CI, whatever you want, saying, no, this pull request drops code coverage. You cannot merge it. So look at the link that I sent for my tool, check code coverage. It will fail the build on your local machine, but if you have to combine things, if you want to comment on pull requests, it becomes more difficult. And that's like, you don't want to do it yourself. Like, might as well pay some money, someone else.
Okay, thank you. Will the event be recorded? Yes, we do that. I think that was asked before we press the button. So is there any plan to integrate with Safari?
Yes, there is a plan. It's technically very difficult. So we're working on this. The same person who worked on network stubbing is working right now on Safari. We had meetings with Safari team. If we do it, it's going to be desktop Safari, right? Not mobile. So that's already kind of sad. And the first thing that we think will happen is that Safari is built on top of WebKit browser. WebKit is open source, so we probably will compile WebKit and kind of like what we do with Electron versus Chrome, kind of have the same thing where you can run your test against WebKit, and if they work there, they probably will work in Safari as well. So because that we can do much faster. So we work on this. Related question, because I know on the back of everyone's mind, like what about AE11? If you want AE11 support, you're welcome to work on it, open a pull request, we'll review it, we'll be happy to accept it. I don't personally see AE11 happening. I mean, not this century for sure, but maybe next one.
Hopefully then no one is using it anymore. So I agree, app action is better approach than page objects, but isn't it for front-end developers who understand dev code? Do you recommend to automation developer?
So I've written this blog post like stop using page objects and use app actions. If you haven't read it, don't read it because we are thinking of like actually taking down that blog post because it just causes so much anger in the world, and like it's not right. Here's my idea. Page object is an object that you create. So instead of saying click on a button with a selector in your Cypress test, you say, hey, page object, click on a button, and it goes and it has inside a selector, and it will actually do cy.get selector click. Okay. I was arguing that this is completely unnecessary, right? You create these abstractions, and now instead of writing test, you write page object that you can run from your test that hides the details, and yet your page object and the test themselves add absolutely zero to your users. Like the whole page object has zero benefit to the user. So instead I say, hey, if you're testing your button, right, that like fetches fruit, just write a test that says get button with caption fruit and click on it. The single most direct way so that you can read the test and see what it does, right? Now, imagine under the hood that click fetch fruit probably calls a method in your application like, app.fetchFruit. Now that's an app. That's an app action. Because Cypress has direct access to your code, right? If you can do like spying on person.greet or spying on console log or like stubbing window open, you can as well get a reference to your app object that inside the button calls anyway, and from your test just say fetch app, fetch users, right? So the test that just checks the UI for fetching the users will use the button. Anyone else, any test that needs fruit before we can do anything else, like testing, deleting fruits, modifying fruit, can just say app, fetch fruit, and now use the UI to interact them. Because it will be faster, it will bypass the UI. And that forces you to actually work on your application code, right? It forces you to have a method fetch fruit that anyone can use. So someone who works with like on transitioning to GraphQL, and they like will say, yeah, I understand the interface of my app. It has fetch fruit method. Let me add just dog because I'm using it from our application code and we're using it from the Cypress test code. So let me improve it a little bit so it's easier to use, has fewer surprises, checks its input argument. That work that you do for testing also benefits your users because it actually makes your application production code better. But because people always want what's the best way, there is no best way. I'm arguing that now this is possible with Cypress because your specs run right inside next to your code, so they can do it. Why this was never a problem with Selenium, WebDriver, TestCafe, Puppeteer, Playwright, because they cannot do that. Your code can never have a reference to application JavaScript objects because it runs completely outside of the browser. Cypress can do it, so it has a better way accessing and like kind of doing the things you already tested once through the UI. So you want to use page objects, absolutely do it. Write them, use custom command, create it, whatever you want. It's possible. But I think there is a way to actually maybe do it a bit faster, and that would benefit the users a little bit more. So up to you.
Okay. Short question to you. Do you still have energy? We have about 6, 7 questions left.
Absolutely, no problems. I have 27 minutes.
Okay, great. So the next one, do you envision a time where we can use Cypress or Cypress-like setup for React Native? Asking for a friend. So
if you stopped it on the first line, right? If you envision using Cypress for React, right? And like stop. So right now we're almost done with component testing for React, as a core feature, because I had it for a while as like additional library. So we want to cover just React, whatever runs in the browser first. React Native is absolutely outside. There are no plans. It's completely different architecture. We cannot control it, run it. So you can test your app while it still is a web app before it gets, excuse me, converted to the native app. Unfortunately, so unfortunately, no.
Okay. Does request reply always talk to the server first, even if I want to mock the response?
No. So if you do rec reply and you give an object, we just send it back right away. It doesn't go to the server. But if you do rec reply and then give a callback function, then we know that you want to go to the server, get the response, and then pass it to that callback so you can modify it before it gets returned to application. So no, it depends if you provide callback or an object.
Then can cy.intercept be useful to automate SSO tests by
I think
modifying
yes.
responses?
Yes. So single sign-on, right, are tough in Cyprus because there's multiple domain, but because now you can like rewrite everything and change like redirects, probably should make it simpler. I never looked at single sign-on. We actually, like Amir and Kevin are preparing two big guides for Auth0 and Okta to be actually merged in our documentation and real-world app showing how to do single sign-ons using those providers. So they will answer that question much better, right? I don't know how they're doing it, but so just wait for official guides.
Okay. If I can intercept and modify, what are your thoughts about adding a mechanism to mutate JavaScript code loaded by the server to deeply mock objects?
So, but this is a problem with it's hard or like impossible. How do we modify mutate JavaScript code loaded by the server? Cypress runs in the browser. It has no access to your server, right? So it cannot modify anything. Like your server is, imagine your server is running on like AWS. How do you have access to modify it? You can't. Okay. So the only thing that I was thinking, which we actually will release this year, don't ask. We're releasing Cypress for Node, right? Same experience, same UI, time traveling debugger, spying, stubbing, everything, right? But instead of testing a website, you'll start your Express server or whatever, like serverless function, whatever, right? And it will run inside the container, but we can control, we can stop the network and calls, right? We can mock things, rewrite them on the fly, and you will see results there. So that will be possible in that case in Cypress Node, but not in Cypress right now because it's completely code outside of Cypress completely.
Yeah, I mean, it was my question, and I'm because I saw you modifying HTML that is modified on the way, so I thought maybe that could be done with JavaScript.
So the one thing, what I kind of looked before, but we, I was looking how to test like netlify functions, like all the serverless functions, right? And I was thinking, well, you just need to load it, but you want to control its dependencies and then send it HTTP request. Well, I can send a request using cy.request, right? Like you can do API testing with Cypress. So I was thinking like, and I had some prototypes where I would start my function under test inside the Cypress plugin file. Okay, starts, that's where I can stub everything. I can use knock and all these libraries, and then I can, do API requests. But it was kind of like difficult thing. So just wait for Cypress Node. Cypress Node is excellent. They will solve everyone's problems. They will knock just Ava Mocha out of
How to balance speed and stability from stub responses and losing touch with the reality of your application?
Like the examples that I've shown, we actually have to slow down things, right? A lot in cy.intercept because I noticed that a lot of problems is not happy paths, right? The server happy path and your stubs are happy paths, but how does your application handle network errors? I didn't show any examples, but in cy.intercept you can just specify, 500 and like fail, right? Response from the server. Maybe 500 after like 30 seconds. How does the application handle when some of the JavaScript and some of the Ajax fail to load? How does it respond when they load out of order, delayed? With cy.intercept, you can all do that, right? But you're not looking for like just speed and stability from your test. You actually want to stress test your application. How does it behave when things go badly? That's, I think, more important than speed and stability.
Thank you.
Okay, then we have, would it be possible to override an intercept again by alias, or are there reasons why that is a bad idea?
This was my idea. So when we were talking about like how do you change intercept, how do you override, I was like, just give it an alias, allow people to fetch and override by an alias, right? But Brian likes this more, I would say, complex solutions that think about the general case, like, and kind of try to mimic what like a middleware pattern would be, right? Which brings complexity. It's more powerful. But this was my thing. So if you look at my blog post about Cypress Intercept problems, this is what I've done. On top of cy.intercept, you just write your own command. Every intercept is saved as an alias. You can pull it back, override it, right? Because it's all programmatic. So yeah, I would do that like that.
Okay, last two. Is there a plan to support parallel execution of Cypress tests?
So you do that on a container level, execute them in parallel, right? Where Cypress run -- parallel, but it has to be independent. Otherwise, Cypress, it will never work on the same machine. Imagine you opening two browsers and each one needs like a focus and type into the input, and this one needs, and this, like, what happens, right? The tests become flaky. So running them in parallel inside containers, that's the way to go, and that's already done. So.
Okay, and last question, not a question. I just wanted to say thank you for the organization and to Gleb. Great things that just happened.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
It's been great. And thank you for organizing. I hope this meetup is very useful to many people.
Yes, thank you a lot for coming again. We are so glad that you joined us. I learned so much more today.
Absolutely.
So,
Hit me on Twitter or email anytime you want to ask me something. I'll be happy to.
so thank you again.
Take care, everyone.
And I mean, we have still 20 minutes that we can use the room. I don't know if you want to stay, Gleb. You answered so many questions, so we would all understand if you leave. Just the last question, we have here a feedback form. Please maybe add some feedback for us. You can write in there anything, at least as it's not evil. But also critic is welcome so that we can improve.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
and
have to see what my son is up to, but it was a pleasure. Choose.
Yes, stay
bye.
safe.
Bye.
Yeah, you all can still stay or
Bye-bye.
leave. It's up to you.
I'm just so happy that you all came and that we got a nice talk and such a nice group of people. I'm just happy for lots of days now.
Yeah, I'm also very happy that Ramona joined me when I posted that, and very quickly Ramona wrote me and offered her help, and I really appreciate it. It's so much nicer to organize it together and also
Yeah, thanks.
to not be a single white dude doing that thing.
I'm just really content.
Oh, it stops the recording, by the way, so
Oh yeah.
people can speak free, right? If I find the button.